worldwide affairs have a place in your day, this is the place you will want to stay. The Ron Bobb-Semple International Podcast with your host, world-renowned voice of Garvey and global news commentator, Ron Bobb-Semple.
Greetings and welcome to the Ron Bobb-Semple International Podcast. We will be addressing global issues that impact our day-to-day lives.
We're looking ahead here to Cockpit Country. So where you see that little house, red top there, is Freeman's Hall. What you can see there in the shadow is the formation of the conical hillocks, which is the significant feature of Cockpit Country, karst limestone topography, right? What I'm showing you here is that Freeman's Hall is a reference point for this debacle that we're experiencing called the Special Mining Lease Area 173. Special Mining Lease 173 starts just about where that house is and goes over the hill and goes right over the hill across the border into St. Anne and to a community called Madras, which as the plane flies would be about 2-3 miles out, maximum 4. So you're seeing the conical hillocks, which is a critical feature of Cockpit Country. Basically behind me, you would find the same features going back into the rest of Cockpit Country, which would go all the way across the Flagstaff in St. James and back out down to Magotty, coming across the Nassau Valley where there's the Appleton Estate, and across the hill there, behind there, shooting all the way out and coming back up to Oxford, and it would come across through the hills again, back up here.
So massive.
It's massive.
Bauxite is a sedimentary rock with a relatively high aluminum content. Jamaica contains some of the largest known deposits of bauxite in the world. The mining areas are located in the western and central parts of the island. After mining, most of the bauxite is carried to alumina plants where it is refined. The previous voice you heard was that of my special guest, pointing out the demographics of an area in Jamaica that we will be discussing. Joining us from Jamaica, the land of wood and water, is the executive director of STE, the Southern Trelawny Environmental Agency, Hugh Dixon. Greetings and welcome to the Ron Bobb-Semple International Podcast.
Welcome, and thanks for having me. It's a pleasure.
Absolutely. You have been at the helm of this agency for over 2 decades. Tell us about the organization and what are some of the challenges you have been faced with over the years?
Basically, I founded with a number of other people this organization in 1996, and the genesis of it was to try and engage in environmental conservation in the Southern Trelawny area, which is sort of the center of Cockpit Country and its environs, which is basically Cockpit Country, and to protect the area, which is significant for a number of things, which we'll maybe get into in due course, and to promote livelihoods for the people living within the area, that their activities and their livelihoods would not be destructive to the environment. So we have both an objective of conservation and sustainable livelihoods pursuit for the people within the area using the natural resources. That's the objective of Southern Trelawny Environmental Agency since its inception in 1996. And basically what we do is we operate with grant funding to do a range of projects that meet the stated mission and that impacts the communities in and around Cockpit Country, which numbers anywhere in the region of about 66 communities here in this particular region. Basically, I've been at the helm since the inception until now, and maybe in about 2007, at our first challenge, because for the first time the area was placed as a place for prospecting licenses by the government then for mining bauxite, which that means that basically it would allow the mining companies to come in and determine if there was bauxite present in this area. which is a fact already known by the Jamaica Bauxite Institute. And we, other partners in the environmental movement and in the communities, took exception to it and basically went national to advocate for no mining in the area. So that has been pretty much the challenge of the organization, in addition to implementing its projects over that period of time and ensuring that the projects benefit conservation, benefit livelihoods for the people living here, and also advocate against the mining of bauxite.
Cockpit Country in Jamaica is an area in the parishes of Trelawny, St. Elizabeth, St. James, St. Anne, the birth area of Marcus Messiah Garvey, Manchester, and the northern tip of Clarendon. Brother Hugh, please share with us the history of this 500 square mile area.
Basically, it has a geologic history, yes? The area is predominantly white limestone, and it emerged from under the sea some 15 million years ago. Fossils, seashells, sea creatures, and it emerged as a plateau. With precipitation over these years, it weathered, with the chemical reaction between a weak acid, and it developed into a series of rolling hills or conical hills, which defined the topography of the area. And if you take the geological history, which created this karst, what is called in geology, karst topography, you get an area of karst limestone topography. And the dominant karst feature here is cockpit karst. So you get Cockpit Country forming out of this contiguous spread of white limestone, which is what defines it geologically. Interestingly, we have the human history, which would have come on several planes. Yes, there would have been Tainos here. Black people would have got here. Historians may look at it too, that they may have been here before Columbus. If you start with Columbus, then you had the slave trade, which brought Africans to the shores of Jamaica. And when they landed here from West Africa, this landscape looked pretty much like West Africa. Some people took off. We have the history of those who were contained on the plantations on the flats, more to the coast. But in these hills, in these cockpit hills, you had people who would have escaped and created their own villages here and operate in this sort of what I call the spinal ridge of Jamaica, between here, the Windward Maroons, located in a compound, which is in Cockpit Country, and all the way out to the Leeward Maroons, traversing across. So essentially, by you get to the point of the treaties with the Maroons by the British, you have a case of several treaties with Maroon communities running along to give them their freedom and their access to this area. And by extension, the Cockpit Country would have been an area identified as the area allocated or given to the Windward Maroons, who are predominantly in a compound. Basically, the definition we have now of discrete parishes of St. Anne, Trelawny, Manchester, St. Elizabeth, parts of St. James, that this landscape called Cockpit Karst and Cockpit Country falls in, would not have had those boundaries then. So it was more a finger pointing to locations that would represent their holding or that which would be associated with their treaty. And if I say so advisedly, the actual area size of what would have been allocated to them is something that is, in question. The fact is that Cockpit Country, as we now know it, is the significant reference point that is the area that is under threat. And it also is the area that is regarded as the home of the Windward Maroons, which is where we are.
What are the disputed boundaries?
Well, but what we have here is a situation where, as I mentioned in the earlier statement, back in 2007, we got wind of prospecting, that is, people coming in to test if there's bauxite in the area, which would have been the bauxite companies granted a special prospecting license by the government of Jamaica to come and test that. We took it as an issue. And we made noises, and the government called us in. We had a meeting with the minister of the day, which turned out to be Roger Clark. And the consensus was then, let us define the boundary of Cockpit Country. They commissioned a study by the geology department of the University of the West Indies, which drew in some sociologists and people with other disciplines. And they went out in 2008 to make a determination of what would be called the boundary of Cockpit Country. with existing academic research and scientific information. By the end of 2008, that commission, the team, had come back and said, listen, we have a number of recommendations. Let's get it going to the communities. Let's go into the general population to get a consensus as to what should be acceptable as the Cockpit Country boundary. It went out by one Professor Dale Weber, and he made the final report, having had several over 18 community meetings, where the decision was taken that the Cockpit Country should be determined as the boundary that was named the Cockpit Country Stakeholders Group boundary, which if you look on Google, you will see it as it is overlaid Trelawny, St. Anne, sections of Manchester, and out to St. Elizabeth and St. James. That recommendation went in, and we waited for the government to officially declare it. They did not make very much of that. All this period of time, 2008 through to 2013, when we started to clamor for it to be made official. In 2017, therefore, we went and protested, sent a petition to government, which has a ruling that if you get a petition that numbers over 50,000 signatories, you will get the ear of the government. We got a petition that had 36,000 signatories. And the government decided to respond. That was the year 2017. The Prime Minister went into the Parliament on the 21st of November 2017, that same year, and declared that they were now going to declare the boundary of Cockpit Country. But the recommended boundary by the study was tactfully altered to create a situation where sections of that boundary were annexed to facilitate bauxite mining. And if you look in the south, you will find that there are mining lease areas, prospecting mining lease areas to the south, to the west of the Cockpit Country. And the significant one was Special Mining Lease Area 173 to the northeast. The Prime Minister's pronouncement on the 21st of November 2017 conveniently left out this area of some 8,335 hectares of land in northeast Cockpit Country called Special Mining Lease Area 173. The outer boundary in the northeast that was cordoned off is exactly the border for the Special Mining Lease Area. And effectively, they issued in 2018 a lease over the signature of the Minister of Mining that released those lands to the Noranda Bauxite Company to mine. In 2019, they started to mine the area, and the National Environmental and Planning Agency said to them, listen, you have to secede, you have to pull back because you don't have a permit to mine the land. There's a protocol in place. You have to firstly apply for a lease. That follows with the terms of reference for an environmental impact assessment to be done. And on the strength of the environmental impact assessment, we will determine whether we recommend to government that you get a lease and, by extension, a permit to mine. That was going in reverse. A lease was issued, no environmental impact assessment, and no advice to the people that live in the area affected. So when we were first told in May of 2019, we were being told that mining would have begun on the 19th of September 2019. And we said, oh, but you know, we heard in Parliament that there was going to be no mining in Cockpit Country, this recommended boundary. Now you have issued a lease and the mining entity is coming to tell us as community that they're going to start in the 19th of September 2019. So we go on a protest, if I'm racing the process too fast, which results in the realization that there was no environmental impact assessment. They hurriedly did an environmental impact assessment, and it ended up being rejected by the National Environmental and Planning Agency, which is the government regulatory entity that gives this permit. It was rejected 6 times between 2019 and 2020. It was reviewed and rejected again by the public earlier this year. So it's not yet approved by the National Environmental and Planning Agency. In the midst of all of this, my brother, we recognize that the special mining lease SML 173 was issued to a partnership between the government of Jamaica and the Noranda Bauxite Company, which was put together, the government being a 51% shareholder and the Noranda a 49% shareholder. So the government of Jamaica is involved in the effort to mine bauxite in partnership with Noranda Bauxite in a company called Noranda Jamaica Bauxite Partners 2, where the government profits 51% and Noranda is 49%. So that's where we are.
Let's put this in some perspective, Brother Hugh. Back in November of 2017, you mentioned the Andrew Holness administration announced that it was planning to grant Noranda Bauxite Company the special mining license referred to as the SML 173. The lease was issued in 2018 and scheduled mining was slated to begin in 2019.
Yes.
The Minister of Transport and Mining, Robert Montague, announced recently that the government will not revoke the special mining license. What's next?
Several things would have taken place. There would have been the protest, which we took before the Parliament of Jamaica. There would have been several groups that would have come out in opposition to it. And the fact that there is resistance resulted in the government saying that of this 8,335 hectares of land, which sits on an area that straddles the boundary of Trelawny and St. Anne, that they would pull back, meaning they would give up some 6,000 hectares, which is on the Trelawny side, and they would proceed to mine 2,300, etc. hectares in St. Anne, which is in fact still mining Cockpit Country. So they've pulled back. They say they're compensating the company by making new lands available in St. Anne to the company. So they've pulled back 6,000 hectares from Trelawny of this 8,000, and they are going to compensate the company by that 6,000 hectares elsewhere. But they have not said that they're going to change the boundary of Cockpit Country to incorporate this that they've given up. So we expect that it's a hoax. You are pulling back. We're pulling back for the moment, but at some point down the line, we will come back. Maybe when the people on the front line are no longer there, we will come back to mine it.
Mention the word bauxite to many Jamaicans in certain rural areas, and immediately they will conjure up pictures of red mud. That is because the red mud, the lake, stands as a grim reminder of destruction to the land once the ore has been mined. What health issues are of a concern by the dust from the mud lake?
Well, the dust is significant. It is definitely known to cause respiratory illnesses for people with asthma, lung challenges, sinusitis. And we are here of the belief that some cancers have a direct relationship to it. Maybe be willing to welcome some assistance to do more research to discern that as a fact. But we know that people who live in and around these mining areas suffer that. They also suffer because of the particle sizes that are associated with the dust coming from the operations. So the health issue is a given. The specificity of it is to be determined with more rigorous research to determine specifically what is directly related, and with that we would want some assistance with. But the pollutant is also the contamination and pollution of their water supply, their water tanks, their roofs, their indoor, their beds, their clothing are totally affected, and the quality of their air in the area in which they live. So after a while, it is impossible to live there comfortably, which means that it means relocating people and disrupting their lives, their livelihoods.
Right, because environmentalists say that the heavy metals and the residue are seeping into the groundwater,
into the groundwater.
Is polluting rivers and streams downstream.
So it's not just affecting the health of the people who are directly in close proximity to the operations, but it is impacting people downstream. So a lot of the associated medical problems that people who feed from the watershed and the water sources that come from that area are illnesses that also need to be put into the mix for research, because those people are consuming that water from those sources.
Cockpit Country was where the Maroons lived, and it is where the British, as you mentioned earlier, were defeated during the Peace Treaty of 1793. Does there need to be unity among the Maroons in Jamaica? From reports that I've seen, there seems to be different factions that are not on the same page when it comes to ensuring that their communities are not disrupted by the mining expose.
Yes, there is need for unity. It's a topic, it's a subject, it's an issue that affects all of us, whether we belong to the same grouping politically or by heritage. And I think that that's something that would be helpful to the Maroon community, which by reference here is not just restricted to those communities that are named, Charlestown, Compound, etc.
Okay.
Because a lot of people, a lot of us are descendants of those people who dropped their seed as they moved from the windwards to the leewards, as we trafficked in almost an island on the spinal ridge because the coastal plains were occupied by sugarcane and the plantation owners, and hence the war. So we never went much on the coastline. We kept communicating. The distance from a compound to Portland would have been like a week. So people were sleeping all over the place. Huh? And what happens when we sleep? We leave our seeds there. So it's not enough to just assume the Maroon heritage is limited to these communities that gain treaty. And bear in mind that there were several treaties, over 20 of them along that ridge, for the property owners to have defending their space in the hills. For the many communities of Maroons that are around with different chiefs, etc., and the many people who are operating within the landscape of Jamaica, there's need for dialogue to come up with an understanding, a knowledge of the history of the Maroons, the fact that they are significant in giving us freedom, not freedom handed on a plate in 1962 by your oppressors, but they fought and won it and got it on treaty rights, which the British High Commissioner here says is a treaty that they respect for the significance of treaties with states. So yes, your call and your suggestion is quite appropriate, because I think there may be different reasons for which there may be discord in a family of people that have a similar history, but getting it right and getting the unity is important.
How can the integrity of Cockpit Country be kept intact?
Recognize the boundary that was recommended by the Professor Weber report, which speaks to several things. It speaks to the core, it speaks to the transition zone where people live, and the outer buffer that would be there to protect everything that is in this unique landscape with its biodiversity, its unique ecology, its history with the Maroons, and its potential for economic growth because of its unique topography and the ability to expand our tourism. Plus, protecting the water, which is significant on an island state like Jamaica, and which doesn't just serve the 73,000 people living within the ambit of Cockpit Country, but the water that flows out into the Black River, the Great River, the Martha Brae, the Rio Bueno, that serves the tourism industry on the coast and the many housing schemes and residents and their economic activities.
Your objective, Hugh Dixon, is to expand the employment opportunities in rural Jamaica and the Cockpit Country region, in particular, by creating alternative livelihood opportunities for young people in the buffer zone communities. How much assistance do you get from the government in order to accomplish this feat?
Well, our activities are based primarily on grant funds. We secure grant funds from donor agencies, be they local donor agencies or bilateral institutions that offer grant funding. From government, we would consider them a partner insofar as whatever we're doing relates to their different quasi-agencies or departments of government. But in terms of government support, no. We don't get any sort of stipend or any subvention. We're a non-government agency, not-for-profit, charitable, and all of what we do is based on our own efforts and our own initiative.
Where does your passion come from?
Well, it comes from several things. I mean, Cockpit Country is home. Where I'm speaking to you from here in Albertown is my home. It's where I grew up. I grew up in a household that has a whole 130-year-old history. My ancestors are from here. This is my roots, and I'll protect it with my life. Beyond that, I'm an agriculturalist. Beyond that, I'm a rural development specialist, having been in this role for some 25 years. You know, one would never understand the resilience of the Jamaican spirit, the Jamaican people. It is amazing, especially when you see the context of our global reach, our global impact through our culture, our music, our athleticism, and the courageous nature of Jamaicans when they are anywhere in the diaspora, carrying the lamp and leading the light of people from the African continent, other Caribbean places where there are Black people. We stand tall. We stand tall without state support. And that's what's the beauty of the resilience. That's the passion that I have that says, listen, we are selling our people short and we're selling them out because of short-term gain, because of the fact that our government is broken, is having financial problems. That can be solved with our own creativity and getting our people to participate in the dialogue about how we move forward and create prosperity with our own resources and our own creativity and our brilliance. University of the West Indies is among the top 5% of universities. And we've trained so many people in so many disciplines and we have so much research and there's so much more to do. We need to tap into that. And those who lead us must be careful how they go elsewhere and are imposed on by external ideals and ideas that have no sustainability or are not operating in the interest of our people. We must go back to our roots. Marcus Garvey speaks eloquently. Bob Marley sings beautifully. And Usain Bolt runs to set the stage for us to follow. And our academics are there to watch how they have moved the disciplines and the research to prove some things. Let us go back and tap into it. That's my passion. And for that, I stand resolute that whatever we can do through your program, as somebody I've come to respect, other academics, other people with resource and a sense of pride of place, we need to tap into that.
Hugh Dixon is also the founder of the Cockpit Country Adventure Tours and promoter of the Trelawny Yam Festival, Jamaica's first agritourism and food festival. How can one get in contact with you and your agency?
You know, you can get us on email. We are at info@stea.net. We have a website which we are overhauling. It's stea.net. You can call us at 876-393-6584.
Repeat that number, please.
876-393-6584. Those are our contacts at the moment. And we welcome your involvement, your input, and we stand as the institution within Cockpit Country ready to take the effort and expand it and advocate for all of which I've just spoken to.
Thank you, my brother, for this history lesson and for joining me on the Ron Bobb-Semple International Podcast.
Thank you so much, Rob. It's been a pleasure. All the best to you and your audience.
I thank you very much. Thank you for spending some time with us. If you are so inclined, you can subscribe to these podcasts and donate to them by clicking on the Support the Show button on the website. Please continue to protect yourself and your loved ones during this global pandemic by observing all protocols. Be safe, be strong, and be aware. I'm Ron Bobb-Semple.